Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Champions Chess Tour being held here in Toronto, Canada. Now, I've been having a very rough go of it in this event. On the first day, I lost both of my mini matches to Wesley So and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, respectively. On day 2, I beat Alireza Firouzja, but I did lose to Magnus Carlsen. Now, on day 3, it did not get better. I lost 2 matches, both of which I probably should have. One against Fabiano Caruana and Norbert Abdussator. As such, going into today, the final day, round number 7, I needed to win my match against a very talented Belarusian junior player, Denis Lazavik, and I needed Magnus Carlsen to beat Alireza Firouzja, or else the tournament was finito for me, and I would finish in 7th to 8th place. So, for today's video, as I was mentioning at the start, we're going to be looking at my match against Denis Lazavik. Now, of course, there was a lot of action today, which I will get to in the coming days. But for this recap, we're just going to focus on the match against Lazavik. So, in game 1 of the 2-game match, I know that I need to win. I've been struggling mightily, and now I'm playing against a talented junior player. So, the match begins with e4. I'm playing with the white pieces in game number 1, and Lazavik plays e5. Now I play the move bishop to c4 with the classic bishop's opening here, intending to play d3 on the next move. We get knight f6, d3, guard the pawn, open up the scope for the dark square bishop. Lazavik plays knight to c6, and now I play the move knight c3, and here Lazavik plays bishop b4. Now this already took me a little bit by surprise. I thought Lazavik was most likely going to play bishop c5, but one of the problems with playing this bishop's opening / Vienna is that I have probably played this at least 1,000 times in online blitz, so my opponents can't prepare for such openings. So we get bishop b4, I go knight to e2, Lazavik plays d5, I take, he takes back, and now I castle. It looks like it's a free piece with bishop takes knight, but after queen takes bishop, I cannot capture the queen because the bishop pins the knight on c3. So I decide to castle here. Lazavik plays bishop to e6. Now he guards the knight on d5 since there's no longer a pin towards the king on e1. So I play a3, we get bishop e7, bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, I play f4, and now Lazavik plays the very strong move f6. Now I was hoping that perhaps this would take Lazavik by surprise, but the problem is this has become mainline theory. It's been played by top grandmaster. I think there was a game between Dmitry Andreikin and Anish Giri in this line, and also because I've played this so many times online, many people are ready for this. So at this point in the game, I was feeling very unhappy because knowing my opponent is well prepared, knowing that I have lost the element of surprise in the opening phase, I was not feeling very good about myself. So here I play the move knight g3, which is already a little bit dubious. Probably what I should have done here was traded on e5, played something like d4, and after knight g6 takes queen d3, black can castle queenside or kingside, and in this position, it's fairly balanced. Neither side really has an advantage, but I felt like I needed to win this game and win the match, and so I chose to play something a little bit on the dubious side with knight to g3. So Lazavik goes bishop e6, stopping knight to f5 here, and I can also no longer capture his bishop. So I play fe5, he plays queen d4 check. Important move, by the way, because after knight takes e5, maybe I can go d4, knight g6, and d5 here. And I have some jumps for the horse here on g3, but when black plays queen d4 check, king h1, and knight takes e5, now I cannot push the pawn to d4. So I play queen e1, Lazavik decides to castle kingside. Now here already I was feeling a little bit relieved because I was actually very worried that Lazavik could play something like queen d7 and castles the queenside and start pushing p on the kingside. So we get castles. I play the move bishop to f4. Lazavik goes rook a8, and now I play this move knight e4. Now, this move is also a move that I really did not want to play. If I were playing someone like Magnus Carlsen or Wesley So, for example, most likely I'd probably trade on e5 and play something like knight to e4 here with the 2 knights blockading the pawn, or even queen to e4, and I probably should be able to draw the game. But against Lazavik, I'm trying to create an imbalance here because I desperately need to win the match. So I go knight to e4. Lazavik plays c6 here, stops knight to b5, which would hit the pawn and the queen, and it also stops any jumps to d5. I play queen g3 here, maybe ideas like bishop h6, maybe rook e1, and Lazavik plays knight g6, preventing any threats on the g file. So I go bishop e3, he plays queen d8, and now I play this move bishop to c5. Now when I got to this position, or rather when I was calculating a few moves before this occurred, I thought that I'd be able to get rid of the black bishop pair here on e6 and e7, and I should be completely fine, but I completely overlooked what my young opponent would do here. So Lazavik plays f5, I trade the bishops on e7, and now I go knight to d2, and Lazavik plays a very, very strong move f4. Now, if I could get even one more move in, let's say you have a6 and rook a e1, for example, or even knight to f3 here, white is probably a little bit better here with the 2 knights versus the bishop and knight, But unfortunately, I don't have that time because it is black's move. So when Lazavik goes f4, I play queen to f2, and now I play this excellent move, knight to e5, sacrificing a pawn in the corner, but understanding that the knight is going to g4 and e3, where there will be a massive bastion. So I play knight to f3 here. We get knight g4, and now I gobble the pawn on a7. Lazavik goes knight to e3, attacking the rook and the pawn here. I play rook f2, and now I place the excellent move pawn to g5. Now black is down a pawn here, but it's a very useless a pawn that I have, and black is pushing the pawns on the g and f file here. My king is weak. There's this great knight on e3, and it's very, very dangerous. So I go knight to e4. Lazavik plays g4. I play knight to g5 here, which is just a bad move. Probably what I should have done was something like knight fd2. And black is still much better after knight takes c2, but at least it's not completely lost. So I go knight to g5, and pretty much as soon as I played this move, I realized that my young opponent could have played this retreating move, bishop c8, with the idea of h6, and maybe it's still okay for white after g3 here, but it looks very scary to play, and I think from a human perspective, it's borderline impossible to find the right moves for white. But Lazavik plays bishop d5, which is a move that I was expecting originally, and I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw this move because I thought bishop c8 was simply winning immediately. So here I go c4, and now Lazavik plays a very, very surprising move, bishop takes knight on e4. Now the computer actually wants black to play bishop takes pawn, takes, and then h6 here, because black is going to get these massive pawns here on the king side after, say, takes, and let's say I play queen g5, for example, after takes, king g7, knight is stuck here on g5, no squares available, and it's winning on the spot. Now, again, would this happen in a human game? Very, very difficult. I don't think it's realistic. So Lazavik instead takes on e4, which is completely fine. I take, and now he makes a big mistake with this move g3. Now, I knew I was in trouble during the game at this point, but I always thought that I'd be able to sack the rook, and I should have some compensation. Computer, however, is unimpressed after queen d7, because when I sack the rook, takes queen e3. It looks like I have a knight and two pawns for the rook here, and it's a nice bash on e4. Knight can maybe go to f6, but in reality, after rook e f8, with the king g1, for example, black can line up the legendary triple stack here with queen to f5, and now black is very close to winning according to the computer. Instead, when Lazavik goes g3, I can sack the rook on f4, and now not only am I getting two pawns, but in fact, I'm getting a third pawn here on g3. So the knight and three pawns here in return for the rook, I should no longer be in any danger of losing. So Lazavik plays rook f8, and now I take with the pawn. I didn't want to take with the h-pawn, but unfortunately I have to. If I take with the queen here, black can go king h8. Let's say I play h3. There's now queen e5, hitting the pawn on b2. There are rook f1 check ideas here, and just in general, I think that it's very hard to defend. So I take with the h-pawn, Lazavik checks, we trade, I go king h2, and it looks like the king is very weak here on the h-file, but the g3 pawn covers the h4 square. I can always try to push g4, g5 down the road, and I should be okay. So Lazavik plays queen e5, trying to checkmate me with queen h5. I go queen e2, attacking the rook and covering the h5 square. And now in this position, Lazavik plays rook f5 back, and here I go king g1. We get queen d4, king h1, and now queen e5 is played. Now this is a mistake here, probably at this point after queen g7 with the idea of queen h6 and queen c1 with the right triangle. Black probably still is drawing the game, but after queen e5 and g4, now I'm able to push the pawn to g5. I have bastion ideas with knight f6, and white should have the advantage. So we get rook f7. I play g5 here. Knight guards the pawn. Pawn on d3 holds the knight on e4. And now we have king g7. I play king g1, queen d4. We do a little bit of dancing around the board here. And finally, I play the move g3. We get rook e7, queen f2 played. If I were to play king g2, there's queen takes g5, and black is okay. So I play queen f2, we get rook f7, queen e2, rook e7, queen d2, rook d7, and now I play this move queen h2. Now queen h2 is actually a very slight mistake, but what I'm aiming for here is to play queen h6, checking the king on g7 and trying to win the game. Now the computer says that black can actually gobble on d3, but from a human perspective with very limited time, this is not a move that anybody would play. Because after queen h6 check, if you go king h8, there's queen f8, which is checkmate here. If you go king f7, I can take here. And it looks like after king e6, there's knight c5, forking the king and the rook. If you go king e8, there's also knight f6 check, and pawn holds a knight. Queen hits the rook on d3, and white wins the game. But the computer says that black can actually hide the king with king to f8 here, and there are actually no good checks anymore. There also are no discoveries because the knight can't check the king either, and black is better. Now, of course, limited time on the clock here. Lazavik sort of believes me, and he ends up playing this move queen f5 instead of taking the pawn. And now I go queen e2, rook e7, and here I play queen c2. We get queen f3, king h2, and Lazavik goes back to f5 because he's worried about this check on c3. Here I play queen c3, and now Lazavik makes a big mistake with this move queen e5. Up to this point, black is still relatively okay, even if he goes king g6, for example. But when Lazavik goes queen e5, now I can trade the queens here. And in this position, the knight on e4 is great. The pawn on d3 holds it. Knight holds both pawns here. And black cannot create a pass pawn on the king side. So the 3 pawns here and the 4 on 2 specifically as well, it's a very difficult task for black to save the game. So Lazavik plays rook f5 here, which is a mistake. Probably in this position, he should have played this move b5. Rook f5 makes some sense because he tries to cut the king off from coming closer to the queen side. I'd love to just go all the way over to the queen side here and win the game, but it cuts me off. But after rook f5, I have this nice move, knight to d6, forking the rook and the pawn here. And now Lazavik plays this move, rook takes g5, which effectively loses the game. What Lazavik needed to play here was this move, rook f8. So if I take on b7, there's rook to b8, hitting the knight and winning the pawn on b2. With seconds on the clock, he takes on g5, I take b7, and now I have a 4-on-1 majority on the queen side here, and realistically, this should be very close to winning. So Lazavik plays king f6, I go a4 here, apparently a mistake, don't ask me why. He plays rook g7, I go knight c5 here. My idea is simple. I want to play a5, b4, b5, a6, and use the connect 4 to win the game. So we get king e5. I play the move a5 here. Apparently another mistake. Don't ask me why. But Lazavik blunders with this move king b4. Now at this point, I already thought it was very close to winning because after rook to a7, I can go b4 here. If there's king d4, now I have a6. And the knight holds the pawn. Pawn on b4 holds the knight on c5. And if black ever moves the king, suddenly the pawns are just pushing up the board. I'll get a queen and win the game. And if black plays rook a8, for example, now I have knight e6 check, takes. And here I can go knight c7, rook a7, and I can sack the knight with b5. And after takes, b6 here, black cannot stop both the b pawn and the a pawn from getting to the end of the board and winning the game. But Lazavik plays king d4, which hangs knight e6, forking the king and the rook, and I win the game in a little bit of an easier fashion than I would have expected. So I get this win in the first game. I'm feeling very good about myself, but then I look over at the other board, which I mentioned at the start of this video, where there's Magnus Carlsen playing against Alireza Firouzja, and Magnus Carlsen, with the white piece in the first game, has lost. So Magnus loses in the first game, and now I'm like, uh-oh, I'm going to win my match, but Magnus is probably going to lose to Alireza, and that's going to be the end of my tournament. I'm going to finish in 7th or 8th place, and I'm not going to be very happy. So on to game number 2 here. Now, second game, I'm playing with the black piece against Lazavik. All I need here is to draw the game to win the match, and then I have to hope for a prayer. I need Magnus Carlsen to win with black against Alireza Firouzja in order for my tournament to continue. So Lazavik opens with d4 here. Now I decide to play the move knight f6. We get c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Classic Nimzo Indian here. e3, castles, bishop d3, c5, knight ge2, d5, takes, knight d5, castles, knight c6, and now bishop c2. Now, this is all very, very standard. I actually faced something very similar to this in the Canada's tournament of 2022 against Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland. That game did end in a draw, but Duda did do the same setup with the knights on e2 and c3. So we get bishop c2. I play bishop d6, retreating the bishop, trying to spy the pawn on h2 here, and also down the road, maybe intending to put a knight on b4 to attack the bishop on c2. So we get knight takes knight. I take back. Bishop f4 played by Lazavik, and now I go bishop g4 here, trying to take the knight on e2 and win the bishop on f4. We get f3, I play bishop h5 here. Idea behind this move is to go bishop g6 and blunt the force of this light square bishop on c2. So we get bishop takes bishop, I play queen takes bishop, queen d2 played by Lazavik, and now I go bishop g6, offering the trade of the 2 bishops. Now here already, I'm feeling very good about the position, but white is actually a little bit better after bishop b3, and the reason is quite simply this light square bishop is better than mine, because it can always attack the pawn on d5 or go to a4 and attack the knight on c6, whereas this pawn on d4 is the opposite color of my light square bishop. So I go f6 here, intending to retreat the bishop and guard the pawn on d5. Lazavik plays rook c1, I go bishop f7, we get bishop a4, and now I play the move knight to e7. Lazavik plays knight c3, I go a6, he plays rook e1, and now I go knight c8. Now the reason behind a6 is quite simple. In this position here, white has one of 2 ways to try and increase the advantage. One is to play on the E file or to play on the C file. So if white can play on either of these two files and infiltrate with the rooks, white will have very good winning chances. So when I go a6, it cuts off knight b5, no kebab on the 7th rank here, and the E file is still fairly closed. However, the bishop on a4 does cover this e8 square. So I go knight c8 with the idea of playing knight b6 and knight c4. We get bishop c2, knight b6. Lazavik plays b3, stopping knight c4, and now I go rook e8. Now here already, I thought I was very close to drawing the game because with the pawn on b3, white can no longer put the bishop on this diagonal. If white can pressure the pawn with the bishop on this b3 diagonal, white has some pull here. But once white goes b3 and I go rook e8, now white can never put the bishop on b3, so the d5 pawn is never a serious weakness anymore. And if white tries to ever go b4, that just gives me the c4 square for my knight. So we get knight to e2 played by Lazavik. Now I go knight back to d7. The idea behind this move is that I want to go to either f8 and e6 or b8 and c6 to try and pressure the pawn on d4. Lazavik plays knight g3. I go g6, cutting off the jumps with the horse. We get knight to f1. I play rook takes, and rook e8. Now here already, I'm thinking, okay, position's fine. No rooks on the board anymore. Same color bishops should be pretty drawish. But as it turns out, there still are some issues that I have to deal with. So we trade knight e3. I go bishop f7 to protect the pawn on d5. Lazavik plays queen c3, and now I go king g7. We get a4, and here I play knight to b8, intending to go knight c6 and pressure the pawn on d4. But after bishop d3, I play knight c6, Lazavik goes knight c2, and now white actually is protecting the pawn on d4 and wants to go b4 and b5 because the knight on c2 protects both the pawns. So here I play bishop e8, which is a mistake. What I should have played here was a move queen to f4, pressuring the pawn on d4, but also intending to play queen c1, checking the king on g1. Instead, I play bishop e8 here, trying to be solid, move quickly, keep pressure on my opponent. He goes g3, bishop d7, king f2, king f7, a5, king e7, and now he gets b4. Now again, at this point, I thought I was relatively okay, but I started to realize that there are some real issues in the position. White can go queen d2 and queen h6. If white ever gets, say, this position, for example, suddenly the knight is coming to c5, and white actually has an advantage because all my pawns here on the queen side are stuck on the same color as the light square bishop. So I realized here that I do have to be very, very careful in this position, but I did play knight d8 anyway. Now here, Lazavik plays queen d2, which I think is a mistake. Knight a1 would have been a better move, although I can still probably go back or play bishop a4 as well. Nonetheless, he plays queen d2, trying to infiltrate on the king side. I go king f7 back, so on queen h6, I have king g8 to guard the pawns. He plays h4, I go king g7, he plays queen c3, and now I have this very nice move, bishop to a4, targeting the knight on c2. Now, the position is still relatively okay for white, but the big issue is that the knight is what holds all the glue together here. And if I get knight c6, or I'm able to trade, say white goes here, takes, and knight c6, suddenly both of these queenside pawns are going to fall, and with it, I am going to win the game. Now, Lazavik being low on time did not help. I saw him start to shake his head here, and I knew that it was very likely he would make a blunder, and indeed, he plays this move, knight to e3. Now, what Lazavik should have played was knight to a3, because if I go knight c6 here, white can still play b5, and after takes, let's just say takes, for example, knight e7, it's still a draw, but white has no chances of losing. Instead, Lazavik goes knight e3, now I get knight c6, and suddenly the knight can't go back to c2, and all these pawns on the queen side are in grave danger. So Lazavik plays bishop to c2 here. I play bishop to b5 back, not trading, of course. After knight takes, white guards b4, but after bishop b5, suddenly white has no way of guarding the b4 pawn. So Lazavik plays bishop b1, which is a blunder here. After bishop b3, maybe white is only a little bit worse here after knight takes b4, but at any rate, in a must-win situation here, it's understandable that Lazavik just starts to lose the motivation and falls apart with bishop b1. So, after bishop b1, I play queen takes pawn. The queens come off the board. He plays knight to c2 here. This just loses. Not that there's anything better, but after knight c2, I go knight c6 back. And now either d4 or a5 will fall, and the game concludes shortly. We got bishop a2. I go bishop c4 here, offering the trade of the light square bishops because I'm just going to capture the pawn on a5. We get the trade, king e3, I take, Lazavik plays d5, and now I play a very important move, knight to b3, stopping the king from coming to the center of the board here. White would love to be able to bring the king something like king c5 and king b6. Now, mind you, this is still winning for black, but I don't want to allow the counterplay. So when I go knight to b3, I cut off the king. There's no way to get to the center of the board, and I'm just going to bring my king over to stop the d pawn from getting to the end and becoming a queen. So we have king e4. I play king to f7 here. Lazavik plays f4. I go b5, protecting the pawn on c4. And now the idea is just to push p on the queen side. You get f5. I take. Now I go a5 here, trying to just keep pushing the pawns. White has a d pawn, but the king will always be able to stop this pawn from queening. Lazavik plays d6, c3, king e4. I go king e6. Plays king d3. I go b4, creating another connect 3. We get king c4. Play knight d2, connect 4. GG, why not? But Lazavik plays king b5. After king b5, I take on d6. And here he resigns the game because if white takes on a5, I just keep pushing p with b3, knight a3, and c2. And now I'll be able to push c1, get a queen, and win in short order. So I win both the games against Lazavik. I win my match, and that puts me on the same score as Ali Reza. Now, as I said, this video is just covering the match against Lazavik. I will do more videos, probably either later tonight or tomorrow, talking about the rest of the day. But since it was such a long day and I don't really have time to cover it all in one video, we're just focusing on the Lazavik match. That being said, I do win my match against Lazavik, and Magnus Carlsen, in shocking fashion, does win the second game of the black piece against Alireza Firouzja to force Armageddon, and the Armageddon, Magnus Carlsen comes through with the white pieces and wins, which means that I advance to the survival stage where I'm guaranteed to finish at least 6. I'm not eliminated instantly, but I will face off against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave from France again in a rematch from the second round of the first day in the Champions Chess Tour. So I will be covering that match on my next video, but for right now, we're just going to cover the Lazavik match. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the recap of my match against Lazavik. There will be a recap of the match against MVL and maybe future matches. Who knows what happened today? But we will be back with more videos very soon, but I simply can't do it all in one go. So I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Make sure to smash that subscribe button below if you have not already. And I'll be back tomorrow with more great recaps from the Champions Chess Tour here in Toronto, Canada. See you guys. Bye.